welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get into the program, I'll just have a couple of words about our programming. So all of our programming at Vaughan Public Libraries, for the most part, is free, and currently it's all virtual. So you can find all of our programs on Eventbrite. If you search Vaughan Public Libraries Eventbrite, you'll get the full list. We'll be moving into in-person programming soon at some point, but we'll likely still keep some virtual programs. We offer guest speaker programs every Thursday, or we might be moving to every other Thursday at either 2 or 7. And this program is being recorded. And because not everyone who registered can join us today, we will be sending out the link in a few weeks. It will take a few weeks for it to get through marketing, and then we will also provide a link to Bonnie Kaplan's website with that. So this program will be an interview style talk for about half an hour, and then we'll have time for questions. You can put your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat. Or at that time, you could also raise your hand and ask your question on camera if you want to do that. So in the meantime, it's best if you keep your microphones muted because we're recording, it just improves the sound quality. Okay, so we're very happy to have a very special guest today. Dr. Bonnie Kaplan is a research psychologist who is semi-retired from the Cumming School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. She's been researching how nutrition affects and supports mental health for much of her 40-year career, and she's published widely. She's received many awards for her work, including the Dr. Rogers Prize in 2019, and that was for excellence in complementary and alternative medicine. She and Dr. Julia Rucklidge have very recently published The Better Brain: Overcome Anxiety, Combat Depression, and Reduce ADHD and Stress with Nutrition. So to get things started, I will ask you, Dr. Kaplan, how things have changed over the years in the medical community and the larger community, and where do we find ourselves now as we emerge from a long pandemic?
Those are two big questions, but first let me say I'm delighted to be speaking to. This is not the first public library group I've spoken to, and I'm just delighted. I think it's great that even during the pandemic, our public libraries in Canada are reaching out to people with educational programs, and thank you for letting me be here. And my name is Bonnie, so please call me Bonnie, okay? So you want to know what has changed. You know, in my lifetime, I've seen changes in the medical community being more open and responsive to information that their clients and patients bring to them. And I've seen a whole field of medicine and healthcare called integrative health or integrative medicine crop up. And that's been especially relevant in my work in terms of the integrative psychiatry field. And yet, I have to say that even though I have seen a lot of improvements and things opening up, the book that Julia and I wrote was born partly out of frustration, because we know that the public wants to know more about non-pharmacologic ways to manage their stress, to improve their resilience, and maybe even to prevent and treat mental disorders. And they go to their traditionally, conventionally trained physicians and ask about things like nutrition. And most of those physicians simply don't have that education, which I understand. Julia and I were trained, my co-author, Julia Rucklidge, and I were both trained in the same model, that if there was a mental disorder, it meant you had to treat with medication. Maybe also all the other things: exercise, meditation, breathing, family support, cognitive behavior therapy, etc. But medication was first-line treatment. It's still the first-line treatment. But what we've seen in the last 20 years is that it's not working as we had hoped that it would, because now we've gone from, well, may I throw two numbers out at you? I usually don't use a lot of numbers if I'm not showing slides, but I'll throw two numbers out at you. One is that in about 1960, very good estimates of the rate of mental disorders were about, well, less than 1%, okay? Less than 1%, maybe in some situations 2, maybe 3%. Now, that's in my lifetime. Some of your listeners will have been around in 1960, but now in the world, it's 20%. And that's only what's called point prevalence. If you look at lifetime prevalence, according to the World Health Organization, it's 50%. And I see that number in Sequoia. I just think that's crazy. That's insane that 1 out of the 2 of us will at some time in our life struggle with a mental health problem. And nobody has found the gene for depression, the gene for ADHD, et cetera, because that isn't the way the brain works. So clearly there is room to improve on prevention and treatment. And so we wrote this book to appeal to the general public and say,
Right.
look, learn about this so that you can influence the people who are caring for you.
Excellent. So the reasons why perhaps mental illness is increasing, could we talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
The nutrients in the soil and the processed foods that we're
Sure.
eating.
Let me come back to the soil. Help me remember if I forget to come back to it. Okay, I'm sure you will. So we have to look at our choices. We as a community, as a society, are making very bad choices about what we put in our mouths. And this was born to me, I mean, it really emerged for me when I read about the Canadian Community Health Survey data from 2004. And it wasn't, what I read wasn't published till 2017, but still the knowledge is out there. Excuse me, they asked, you know, they go across the country, they asked people of different demographics, different ages, etc. What they found was that at that time, 48% of what Canadians were putting into their mouths, 48% was ultra-processed products. Some people call it ultra-processed food, but I don't like that term because food is what makes our cells grow and develop and function. And these ultra-processed products do not function as food. Ultra-processed products have fats, carbohydrates, salt, sugar, oils, etc. Usually the bad versions of all of those. But when you look on their packages, you'll see very few minerals and vitamins. And I know that 70 years ago, the starvation experiments from the University of Minnesota showed very clearly that when you take perfectly normal people and you cut their nutrient intake for 6 months by 50%, you get depression, you get anxiety, you get inattention, you get lethargy, and in some cases you get psychosis. So everybody listening, we are repeating those experiments that were done they were published in 1950, and we're doing it at the societal level. And there's no excuse for that. We have to take responsibility and start eating real food. Now, do you also want me to talk about the soil?
Sure, that would be
Okay.
great. Thanks.
We have a chapter, well, we have a whole chapter in the book about the microbiome, which is, of course, a very exciting area, but half the chapter is about the microbiome of the soil and about how we're destroying it all over North America. They're much better in Europe and in South America, actually, than what we're doing in North America. And when we destroy all the little microorganisms in our gut, we know we end up with gut dysbiosis, we end up with all kinds of problems. But when we destroy the microbiome of the soil, we also are harming the nutrient content of our food, so that even when we're eating whole food or true food or real food, whatever you want to call it, even when you're making a huge effort to eat that, you might not be getting as many micronutrients as you think you are. Now, that is not an excuse to start eating processed food and stopping, trying to eat a whole foods diet. It's a justification for trying to eat more of the whole foods. But we know there's such good data showing that this predicts vulnerability to mental disorders. There are longitudinal studies that show clear causation, not just correlation, that when we're eating low nutrient diets, that we are more vulnerable, even in children, to having depression, anxiety, etc. So we have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that even organically grown vegetables might still have the soil might still be depleted, and there still might be a reduction in the minerals, even if it's organic, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is true based on a small sample that we studied, that it's important to understand it, but please don't walk away from organic food. It's really important to try to decrease our exposure to some of the pesticides and herbicides which are hurting our microbiome. And we present some of the data on how that might be affecting our gut. But it is the case that organic means pesticide and herbicide free, and that is not the same thing as nutrient density, okay? And so we were really focusing in our book a lot on nutrient density. And I mean, I think that organic farmers are better stewards of the soil, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are remineralizing or releasing better mineral content for our plants.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I used one technical term there, Sequoia. Maybe I could define the difference between, I used the term micronutrient without explaining it. May I explain that to people?
Please. Thank you.
So macronutrients, everybody is in agreement on how to use the term macronutrient. The macronutrients are the ones that you find even in ultra-processed products, which are things like carbohydrates, fats, proteins. Those are macro, large categories, okay? Now, as I said, though, even though you might be getting carbohydrates, for example, or even protein, it might not be the good kind of carb, it might be highly refined or whatever. So staying away from those products or ultra processed products are extreme. That's a really good thing to do. Micronutrients is a term which is not used universally the same way. So let me just, to be very brief here, let me just say that I am using it to, and this is how we used it in the book, to refer to all of the minerals and vitamins which should be in our food supply. And some of your listeners might be surprised to hear how many there are, but there are at least 30 vitamins and minerals. And so these are what we call the micronutrients.
Okay, wonderful. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how they all would work together and how it's, beneficial to take them together.
Okay. So now I know what's behind your question is that you're moving a bit away from dietary intake and toward nutrients in pill form, because that's what Julie and I have studied the most. We often like to say that we've studied supplements because it's a proof of principle. Our goal is not to put the world on pills. That's, the big pharma has that as its goal, I think, but that is not our goal. Our goal really is to get people first and foremost to eat better. Our book is food first, but there are very good reasons why for some people, no matter how healthy a diet they're eating, and we talk a lot about a Mediterranean style diet as a model, right? But no matter how well they're eating, they still benefit mentally from taking additional nutrients in pill form. Why would that be? Well, one reason is that maybe the foods that they're eating are not as rich in the micronutrients as, 100 years ago. Good reason to believe that. There's a lot of data on it. But another reason has to do with individual differences. So you see, for example, you see mood disorders run in families. And Dr. Linus Pauling, Nobel Prize winner, said in the 1960s yet, I mean, we should all be wondering, what is inherited? There's no clear gene that has been identified, and not for the lack of billions of dollars looking for it. So what's being inherited? And he proposed in the 1960s that probably what's being inherited is something involving the control of how essential nutrients in brain metabolism are managed. And we think he's exactly right, because in our research and in clinical work from those who do clinical work, they often see people eating a very healthy diet who still get better when they take micronutrients in pill form. And now your question really related to, and I know if I don't address this, someone's going to put it in. I don't have the chat line open because I can't look at it and talk, okay? So maybe no one's asked this question yet, but if I don't address this, somebody will. Which are the important micronutrients? And the answer is, it's the wrong question, because our brain needs all of them. And that means that you can look at all the studies that have been done on, say, just calcium supplementation or manganese or omega-3s or vitamin B6, you name it, single nutrient studies. We call it magic bullet thinking. And you don't really benefit mental health except in maybe an occasional person. So what we've been studying, and there are now about 50 peer-reviewed publications on it, is the idea of giving people the entire spectrum. We call it broad spectrum micronutrient formulas. And so when people take the broad spectrum at a higher than RDA dose, but completely safe levels, have never, ever, none of us has ever done a study that didn't have ethics approval, review by Health Canada, blah, blah, blah. And also that means nothing toxic, nothing excessively large. And when you do studies with a broad spectrum formula at a high enough dose, then what you get is at least 50% in every randomized controlled trial, people who get their emotions regulated better. Another 30% show significant improvement. So we've got the really dramatic change, the fairly decent change. And then we always have, in every study, we have maybe 20% of people who don't benefit. And we don't know why. Studies that have, done baseline analyses of all kinds of variables have not yet uncovered what's different about them. So in chapter 11 of our book, we go through all of the multi-nutrient formulas which have been scientifically studied, and this is very important, by people like Julia and me who never take any money from any company, independent scientific research. And that's hard to find. I mean, and we got used to accepting that in psychiatric pharmaceutical research. 100% of that is, in fact, funded by the drug companies. To the best of my knowledge, I've never heard of a drug study that wasn't. But our studies never have been. We've relied on a lot of private foundations, donations, etc. And so our book doesn't mention every product on the shelf. It only goes over the ones worldwide that have been studied, shown benefit, and where there's no conflict of interest, contamination by funding.
Okay.
I give long answers, but you give complex questions. So there are always two parts. I have to cover it all.
And I did jump ahead there because I
hope I haven't lost anybody.
We were talking about soil and nutrients in the vegetables, and then we jumped to the micronutrients in the pill form. And now maybe we can go back to just discussing, as far as diet goes, the recommended diet that works best for most people.
Yeah. Thank you for wording it that way, because it is a question of most. There are people who have unusual needs. I have a very good friend who's exquisitely sensitive to gluten. She lost like a year or more of her life till she figured it out, because on tests she didn't show any evidence of celiac, etc. There's no question for her. But the vast majority of people who eat a gluten-free diet, They don't even know what gluten is. I think one of the talk show hosts proved that in a very humorous sketch where he walked around. Who was that? I think Jimmy Kimmel walked around and asked people, are you on a gluten-free diet? Oh, what is gluten? And nobody knows. So people don't know that it's a fad, et cetera. And probably the vast majority don't really need to be on a gluten-free diet. But if you think you're gluten sensitive, then for heaven's sakes, keep it out of your diet. And there's another group that goes, dairy free. Some people are trying ketogenic right now, especially for weight loss. And there's lots of research on that. But we stepped back and said, okay, we're talking to the general public. The general public is putting basically junk into our mouths 50% of the time. What is the first thing we want people to do? It's to eat real food. So our position in the book, and this is how I always talk to people, is first, clean up your diet, learn to cook. We have a chapter of recipes in the book, by the way, but there are so many online. In fact, if you wanted to learn to cook with, say, lentils, if you put in recipe lentils into Google, I think you'll get something like 15 million in less than 1 second. So that'll keep you busy for a while. There's no excuse not to learn how to cook from scratch. So we propose getting people first to clean up their diets, eat real food. So we emphasize the Mediterranean style diet. Then, if that's not sufficient, if you really think that you would benefit from a specialty diet, ketogenic, gluten-free, casein-free, whatever, then do that. Now, I want to tell you why we emphasize starting out with the Mediterranean diet. First of all, it's proven to bring you both better physical and mental health. Secondly, it's easy to follow. And thirdly, the restrictive diets are hard to follow. A lot of people try something like a ketogenic diet and they just can't follow it. It's too hard to fit into their lives. And so they feel like a failure, and they're probably depressed to begin with. So who needs that? And they also, their reaction sometimes is, well, diet, I just can't change my diet. I mean, they just give up. So let's get people to do the things that they can do by eating real food first. And then if you want to play with a specialty restrictive diet, go for it. If you think it's relevant for you, do it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. And so we would be starting with our diet first, and then if it's necessary, we could add in the micronutrients, micronutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you could talk a little bit about how that would be the primary approach as opposed to.
Oh, I know what you're getting at. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Thank you. You can answer the question for me. Sequoia's read the book. I can tell whenever we talk, she liked the book and she absorbed it. So her questions are very informed that way. That's great. So, so then I went on a digression and I forget what you asked. Primary versus secondary, right. So in chapter 12, the final chapter of our book, which by the way, this is a digression, but I want your audience to know that Julia Rucklidge and I are both scientifically trained. My career, I'm retired now, but my career was completely research. Julia has the most active scientific research program in the world right now at the University of Calgary in Christchurch, New Zealand, studying the role of micronutrient treatment of mental disorders. She's extremely productive. So even though we do very rigorous science, we hired someone to translate our book and make sure that we did not use a single technical word. And we're told that we succeeded in doing that. And I'm trying to speak in the same way. We want to reach the general public. It's not a question of being smart or dumb. It's a question of, everybody in this audience could throw jargon at me that I wouldn't understand. I don't want to throw jargon at you. So in chapter 12 of our book, using, again, no jargon, we present our vision for what a better tomorrow would be. We know we're on the wrong path. There's nothing wrong with medication when it helps people, but the way our mental health services are being provided is distorted, frankly. I think it's upside down. And that's what the question referred to. In our ideal world, especially for children with developing brains, they would not be treated first with psychiatric medication. If they're having an emotional challenge, they would first be treated by someone who'd sit down and go over their diet with them and work with them. We even have a section on how to deal with picky eaters. And we would get these children to eat better, get their parents to cook more. As the children get older, get them to take responsibility and cook more. In other words, nutrition first. We would also recommend all the other things. Parents of difficult, challenging children need support. It's an enormous problem for a lot of families. Parents and children might need yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, family support, exercise, you name it. I think they're all worthwhile to be explored. Somewhere in there, if improving diet and everything else is not sufficient, then taking a broad spectrum micronutrient formula, which is evidence-based, makes a lot of sense. And we have published data from children aged, I think 6 is the youngest, in the latest RCT, just came out last week actually, all the way up through adults. And we see the same benefit for mood dysregulation in particular. Irritability is resolved dramatically. Mood swings resolved dramatically. So looking at a broad spectrum formula makes sense. All of that should be primary. Secondary treatment should be considered sometimes, and that would be psychiatric medication. And our book is not an anti-medication, message, but most people that we know, once they follow the pathway that we describe of nutrition and education and so forth, they really, they are able to do well enough without medication. And that is a better life for them. A lot of people who are already on medication also report that when they eat better and they take micronutrients in pill form, that they can lower their medication dose and therefore decrease their, quote, side effects. And that's advantageous for them too. So that's the idea. It should be education and nutrition and education about nutrition first before. And that's why, if you're wondering why I keep saying nutrients in pill form instead of nutrient supplements, because I have trouble thinking about nutrients being supplementary. They should be primary.
And the medication would be supplementary, right?
That's right. Yes.
So one question that is discussed a little bit in your book is the high quality micronutrients. They're not outlandishly expensive, but they do cost more than like a regular multivitamin would cost. So just the importance of having this type of micronutrient supported by our medical and insurance systems so that everybody can afford this.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things, Julia in New Zealand has routinely been able to follow up participants in all of her RCTs 12 months later. And it's depressing how many of them who have done really well and are so excited, has stopped taking the nutrients and gone back to medication, because in New Zealand, medications are free. And I mean, that's a big enticement. In Canada, they're subsidized heavily. And so here also, people find it cheaper to take medication. And there are now, as I said, there are 50 or so peer-reviewed publications. The one that came out last week was in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. And it's a multi-center study, multi-country, Canada and the US. And their results with children with ADHD and mood dysregulation were so excellent. And yet we know that it's just, I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetime, that governments will see the advantage of subsidizing, helping people by these evidence-based, proven formulas or not. We published, I guess we've published 3 long-term case analyses now, showing that in all these cases, taking the micronutrients cost less than 10% of their previous conventional care. All of that is in the book also. And if I knew how to get that information if anyone out there listening is a policymaker, I want to talk to you, or if you have a way to reach some of the Ontario or other policymakers, they need to know this, because mental health care is conventional mental health care is very, very expensive.
Great. Okay. I just want to say I haven't seen, I'm not closely monitoring the chat. My colleague Nina is doing that, but I haven't seen a lot of questions come through. If you have, some people are making comments, that's great. If you have any questions for Bonnie, please put them in the chat and we will read those out. Why don't we?
Okay. I'm able to look at the chat line because it's not buzzing by me real fast. And why is organic food so expensive? I don't think I'm the one to answer that. I understand that they go through a tremendous bureaucracy to be able to be labeled, organic, but I'm not an expert in that. I'm sorry. Right, fiber. Oh yeah, this is interesting. It's not the main topic, but in our book, we had to keep our comments about the microbiome. Is it okay that I'm addressing this, Sequoia?
Perfect, please.
All right.
Yeah, it's your program, so
my program.
If you like.
I love answering questions. So anyway, the microbiome, we had to, we could have written a whole book on the microbiome, but what's the point? There's so many good books out there, and someone has recommended a book called Fiber Fueled. But at one point we make in the book, and I'd like to reiterate it here, is that a lot of people are very enamored of probiotics. And the probiotic, we have a little section, Julia reviewed the literature on probiotics and mental, not physical, but mental health. And it's not impressive yet. But we actually think that prebiotics are much more important. And I don't know, some of it ended up on the cutting room floor when we had to cut the manuscript because it was going on and on. But certainly you need to look into the fact that if you're eating a Mediterranean style diet, you are giving your gut the prebiotics, which enable the healthy bugs to grow. Prebiotics are the food that you feed the healthy gut bugs, and they are in the Mediterranean style diet. They are especially fiber. That's what twigged my thought here. Now the questions are really coming in. So the microbiome is very important. It's not a major topic of our book, but there's a lot of research and a lot of books out there to read. So I'll just go on. Nina, you feel free to interrupt me too if I'm cutting. Does eating as a family improve eating habits? I don't know the literature, scientific literature on that off the top of my head, but certainly there's a relationship between a family eating together and overall child outcomes. And I don't know how much of that is nutrition. If you're just eating highly processed products at every meal together, it's not going to be that great. But eating as a family is a good value to have. And cooking as a family is another good value to have unless your kids are very, very young. Breath of fresh air to a dietitian. Well, this is my opportunity to say that dietitians are my heroes. I say it all the time. Margaret Mead pointed out that there is nothing harder to do than to change the way people eat. Actually, what her quote was, she was a famous anthropologist in the 1950s and 60s. She said, it's easier to change a man's religion than it is to change the way he eats. And I think it's true. It's really hard to convince people to change religion or diet, and women too, though she was using language of the era. So thank you to the dietitian, and enjoy the book. And after you've read it, drop me a note, and also give us some lovely stars on an Amazon review. That helps us spread the word. How do you know if it's truly organic? There are symbols on food that indicate you're dealing with a licensed, certified organic producer. That's all I can say. Where to purchase? At your health food stores. I don't know what town you're living in, but look around and ask around. And that's, I mean, where I live, Safeway has an increasingly large organic section, which is very interesting. Healthy soil. Okay, this comes from the dietitian. The soil issue is huge. Go to farmers markets and talk to the farmers and tell them how much you value what they do and how our human brain function is dependent on them doing it well. And if there's anything that you can do to support them in decreasing their herbicides and pesticides and going organic and adding minerals to their soil, you know, you can do that. You can advocate for the public by talking to the farmers. Find out what they're doing. Maybe they're talking, maybe you're talking to someone who's already very well informed. Maybe they know about the regenerative agriculture movement. We put some of that in our book with some links. It's great to
Bonnie,
see.
there is a question.
Yep.
You describe the difference between broad spectrum multivitamins and micronutrients.
Okay, Mike, thank you, Nina. Micronutrient is a term we're using to refer to roughly 15 vitamins and 15 minerals, okay? I'm gonna back up and I have to make sure I remember to say broad spectrum. Okay, I wanna explain something because I take it for granted people know this and they don't. And so we put it in the book with a diagram. A lot of people don't know where our vitamins and minerals come from. They literally don't know how we get them. So a big part of our book, well, it's not a large chunk, but it got shrunk down, but a really important part of our book is to teach people where they come from, and more importantly to me, what they're doing in our brain. So I'm going to give you a little synopsis here. So our soil should have roughly 15 minerals. Plants, crops absorb those minerals, and then these very clever plants synthesize approximately 15 vitamins. They're good at that. We can't do it at all. The only vitamins that we can synthesize are vitamin D when sun hits our skin, and a little bit of B vitamins, but we don't even do that. It's our gut microbes that do it. I mean, they're us, but they're not us, right? So when the plants are given all the minerals that they need, plus they need sun and water, of course, but when they have those minerals, they manufacture about 15 vitamins. We come along, we eat the plants, or we eat the animals that ate the plants, like cattle, and that's how we get roughly 15 vitamins and 15 minerals. And it's really the only way to do it other than pill form. So that's how we get in from healthy soil and healthy plants as we used to eat like 100 years ago, and choosing to eat that stuff instead of the packaged stuff, we stay healthy. Why is this important? Our brain is only about 2% of our weight on average, but our brain is metabolically the most active, greedy, hungry organ in our body. And so it soaks up at least 10 times what it should. In other words, 20%, at least 20% of the nutrients that you're eating. And it does so because it needs those nutrients to produce the chemicals that we need in our brain. Now, you know what some of those chemicals are called. You've heard of serotonin, you've heard of dopamine. Do you know of any food where you can go and eat serotonin? I don't. Can you eat dopamine in your diet? I don't know how to do that. I've asked dietitians this. It's simply not possible. But our clever brains, they do okay at certain things. And one of the things they do is they take the vitamins and minerals and they use them to make the metabolic pathways work so that our brains produce the serotonin and the dopamine that we need. And those vitamins and minerals are called, and this is the only other jargon term I think in our entire book practically, is they're called cofactors. I would like children as young as, I don't know, 10 years old to learn about cofactors. I would like our doctors to have learned it in medical school. If you ask them, some of them say, well, yeah, they kind of know what that was, but they don't appreciate in the broader sense, because they were educated the way I was, that we have to consume those minerals and vitamins to be the cofactors to make our brains work, to synthesize our serotonin, our dopamine, etc. And it's a much better way to go than taking a serotonin reuptake inhibitor or something, right? Now, broad spectrum, I think you got the idea of broad spectrum. Broad spectrum is just a term that Julia and I and our other research colleagues coined to refer to the whole spectrum of the 30 micronutrients. It doesn't even include, we need to be getting omega-3s for our brains and our hearts. We need a lot of amino acids, etc. But where we are not neglecting. People know about omega-3s. People are eating lots of protein. You know, amino acids are not a huge problem. But we are not being taught about minerals and vitamins. And in fact, we're being taught to dismiss them. What do we call minerals and vitamins? I wish I were in front of you so I could look for hands raised. We say they're just vitamins. Oh, it's just vitamins. Just vitamins. They're earth-shatteringly important to our brain health and to our brain function. Did I answer that, Nina?
I hope so, yeah.
I said enough, I should have. Okay.
Another question is, do you have a link of recommended broad micronutrients in pill form available in Canada that you could share, and where to purchase?
Yeah.
We need to package it. This is for people. People are willing to try, but you talk about it, but this is a lot of homework. Now you have to go study and get that, you know, one piece of paper when you have to go and buy something. We need to help people with this. They're willing to try, but it's just too much homework, even though it's a very important topic.
So all of that is in chapter 11. Remember, our book and our stance is food first. If you are convinced that you are eating as healthy a diet as possible, fresh, whole foods, then, and you still want to try micronutrients, the formulas are in our book. Why am I not thrilled to be telling you a lot of names here? Because we have been, now I know the word, we have been gaslit constantly by people who accuse us of working for the companies. And none of us in any country, US, Canada, New Zealand, studying broad spectrum formulas has ever worked for any company, and we have never taken money from them, etc. And still we're accused of that. So we avoid very much naming them in public. You can go to my website, and I'll give you the link if you have a pen in front of you, and learn more. You can also look at chapter 11 of our book, and I'm sure that the Vaughan Public Library has copies.
Yes, we do have copies, yes.
Okay. And so my own website is my name, Bonnie Kaplan, but it turns out there are a million or too many Bonnie Kaplans in the world. So I had to use my middle initial, which is J. So it's bonniejkaplan.com. Okay. And I think that that'll go up with the link. I hope I answered that, Nina.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
There is another question. Do you think people would benefit from following diets related to their ethnicity? For example, people from the Mediterranean should follow Mediterranean diet and so on.
Sure. I saw a quick question come in here, Nina. I'm just going to mention, yes, our book is available as an audiobook. Somebody was asking.
We also have the audiobook on order for the library too.
Good, good. And, you know, as always, everything's on Amazon or your local bookstore. So the ethnic diet is really an interesting question. There is a little bit of evidence that when people can immigrate to Canada, say, from any other developing world country where they were used to cooking, etc., if they continue cooking and eating their kind of food, it's healthier than switching to our Western diet. Is pathetic. I mean, I already told you, 48% of what we eat or consume, I guess I should say, because it includes drinks, has no micronutrients. You're just not getting minerals and vitamins. So continuing with your traditional foods is often a much healthier way to go. Yes.
Okay, I have a question. We do have more questions from the group, but I don't want to forget to ask this. So the importance of you know, the effects of trauma, of crises such as the pandemic or other crises that have happened, and the requirements for micronutrients that result.
This question, if anyone's really interested in this question, they should drop me an email via my website, and I'll send them a link to a blog that Julie and I wrote just a couple months ago. It's on the Mad in America website. And we summarized, we got into a line of research. It's mostly hers, but a little bit is mine. Got into a line of research on using micronutrient supplementation, I'll use that word, in people who had huge crises. This is it started before the pandemic. It started in 2010 when they had major earthquakes in Christchurch, very unexpected. She did studies, showed that people who were given extra micronutrients were more resilient, were more return in terms of depression, anxiety, and stress management. They were in the normal range within a few weeks, and they did much better than people who got conventional treatment. Then we had a flood in Alberta. That was 2013. We replicated the results exactly. And there's a graph in that blog, and you'll see all of this there. And then there was also the Christchurch mosque massacres, where in a clinical way, she helped people and asked them to monitor their symptoms, and again, replicated the results exactly. And then we had the Fort McMurray fires in northern Alberta, where they wouldn't let me say anything to the people. There were 90,000 people displaced, and I wasn't allowed to talk even about taking B complex, which is good for resilience. Not allowed to, because, oh, those dangerous vitamins and minerals, you know, we'll just give them conventional care. And then they published the data and showed, instead of a decrease in depression and anxiety and stress levels, they went up. So for a full year afterwards. So we have both, I mean, we have very good evidence that this is something that should be part of stress management. Now we have a pandemic. I have written, I don't know how many opinion pieces before our book came out, trying to get newspapers to talk about the importance of their food. Nutrition is our resilience, not just physically, it's the foundation of resilience for our brains. And so this is a time when we should not be turning to comfort food. I don't know, the newspapers just want to publish article after article about, oh, there's more anxiety now. Oh, how about writing about this, letting me write about the solutions, evidence-based solutions. They don't want to hear about it because it's nutrition and it's just vitamins and minerals, right? I have to keep my sense of humor or I'd go nuts.
For sure. Okay, we have another question, and thank you for that. Can diet help with sleeping problems?
Oh, this is a really good question from Bob, I see. What kind of food is better to cut off? Well, it's processed food that you should eliminate, and that will get rid of most of your sugars and your stimulants and so forth. But the issue of sleeping is really interesting. We've done so many studies now, and this is the royal we, it's a group of us in 3 countries, and such consistent results about mood regulation. And as I said before, if you were on the line, it's not 100%, but definitely, clinically valuable. But the interesting thing that you won't see in the scientific articles is if we're studying people, say, with explosive rage, and so we're measuring explosive rage, that's what our data are. But then the families come in and say, I have more energy. Oh, they're sleeping better. Oh, they're not craving cigarettes as much. Oh, just any number of things. In other words, when you restore or improve brain health, a lot of things get better. And sleep is so often reported as an improvement that Julia did, one of her students did one study specifically in insomnia and showed it very clearly. So I'm convinced that what we're talking about here is overall brain metabolism working better. But I don't have all the data I need yet.
Okay.
There is another question about placebos. I'm interested in placebos, which I see as incredibly potent. Do your studies have control groups included?
Oh, yeah.
How did they respond?
So everything that I've said to you about the randomized controlled trials were a comparison to placebo if they were nutrients in pill form, because you can do a placebo in that situation, or an active comparator after something like an earthquake. Julia invites the entire city of Christchurch to be in her studies. No, it's unethical. It's immoral. Or after the Christchurch mosque mass shootings, it's immoral to offer a placebo. No one would join the study, and it's just, it feels awful. I don't even know if an ethics committee would approve it. But you can compare conventional care, and that's what we've done in all of the post-disaster studies, because conventional care is what is usually offered under the belief that it's a good way to help people. I hope that answered the question.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
So somebody's asking a question about people on social assistance or the working poor. Are there recommendations in the book for those on a limited income in terms of diet and how they might readily access good, healthy foods?
Well, prepare to get your mind blown. Everybody listening to this probably assumes that a whole foods Mediterranean style diet is more expensive than the so-called SAD diet. And that is the, what does the S stand for?
Standard American diet. Yeah.
Thank you. Standard American diet. I went blank there for a second. Standard American diet is, hamburgers and Coke. So the way most people are eating. So it's very interesting that this is a false assumption. It is true if you like to eat lobster and steak 2 or 3 nights a week, that's more expensive. But guess what? Basing your diet on this brings up the ethnicity things. The people who come to this country and know how to cook all the wonderful beans and legumes and root vegetables, etc., they know that it's less expensive than the standard American diet. And we now have data on it. In one of the Australian studies that was run by Felice Jacka and her group, they calculated prior to people starting the study how much it was costing in Australian dollars to eat their processed food diet. Then they taught them about a Mediterranean diet. They had a 1/3 remission with no side effects in less than 12 weeks for major depressive disorder. And guess what? It cost less because they were being taught how to, I'm not saying you should eat beans every night, but learning how to cook with dried beans, or canned is not so expensive either, will save an enormous amount of money. It's expensive to live on restaurant food and processed junky food, and you're hungry again later. And it's expensive to our healthcare system because you're hurting your bodies.
Perfect. Would you be able to give us some examples maybe of some dramatic or just memorable examples of stories of people who've benefited or children who've benefited?
Sure. So actually, let me start by saying, and I know we're getting near the end of the hour, so cut me off when you need to, but if you like stories, our book is full of anecdotes and stories, and every single one of them is true. The only thing false is we put fake names on all of them. They're all pseudonyms, and they're children and they're adults, and Julie and I get emails and letters every week constantly from people who have changed their diet, improved their mental health, sometimes using nutrients in pill form, sometimes not. And that we are in so many people's prayers, it's embarrassing because they are overwhelmed that they have been doing it to themselves, and their doctors didn't emphasize it enough, except for diabetes, but they're not. Even medical centers are not yet talking enough about what an improved diet will do to protect your brain. So We must be near the end of the hour because I lost my train of thought there. So you asked me about
just any stories of
other stories. Okay, no, I didn't lose your question. It was my train of thought. If you go to my website, you'll see one or two, right on the main page, I think I still have a wonderful video of a child whose family chose to go public, talking about how his life improved. And he's a child with complex needs. It's not like these nutrients made him completely normal developmentally. He's still atypical in some ways, but how it improved his life, it's really amazing. And I think it's only about a 6-minute or 5-minute video. So that's better than my telling you stories. You can watch some of those and read them in the book.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So again, people can find you. It's Bonnie J. Kaplan.
Right.
So I guess if you Google Bonnie J. Kaplan, it will probably come up right away.
Or just put .com after it and you'll get my website.
Okay.
May I end by just saying one more thing about the book? I am talking to as many audiences as possible, but this is not a self-promotion thing. I'm retired. I'm not looking for fame or fortune. We really, really think that the public needs to learn about the vast evidence base that newspapers won't cover, magazines won't cover, and you're not learning about it. And so, and people come to us, sometimes they're furious that no one has ever taught them that this is not flaky, but that it's scientifically sound. And so our goal in writing this book is really to educate people so that we can change the mental health system. And if anyone out there is listening and knows a way that I can help do that, you'll know how to reach me now. Thanks to these good people at the library.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job. We really appreciate that the book is coming out at a great time, and we really appreciate you could come and speak with us today. And thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions?
There are some direct messages. I won't be able to absorb them before we sign off. Email me through my website and I'll be happy to talk to you. Okay.
Okay. It's been wonderful, Bonnie. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.